I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, the iPhone 10 hits pre-order markets this Friday, but there may not be enough models to go around by Christmas. Why shipments are reportedly getting cut and the potential implications for Apple's bottom line. Plus, Airbnb's unexpected vacancy. The startup's China CEO walks away after just 4 months at the helm. What it means for the home sharer's future in Beijing. And the first steps to increase online advertising accountability begin on Capitol Hill. California Congressman Eric Swalwell joins us to discuss the Honest Ads Act. But first, to our lead. With the release of the iPhone 10 just around the corner, Nikkei is reporting initial shipments of the iPhone 10 are expected to total around 20 million units this year, a big cut from original forecasts of 40 million. Apple has struggled to solve technical issues around the highly anticipated device, from the OLED screen, facial recognition, and 3D sensors. So what exactly is going on behind the scenes? What does it mean for the release and Apple's upcoming earnings report? I want to bring in our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson, as well as our Bloomberg Tech reporter, Alex Webb, who covers Apple for us. So, Alex, what do we believe to be true based on this Nikkei report?
So there are two big innovations in the new iPhone. There's the OLED screen, the organic light-emitting diode screen, and then the 3D sensor array at the top of the phone. Both of those have had supply issues. It was reported a few weeks ago there were problems with the 3D sensor. The Wall Street Journal did a great piece about the dot projector, which is the thing which literally identifies and maps your face. They have problems in the supply chain there. This is increasingly pointing towards the fact that they have struggled to get through those issues. Let's give one very quick caveat, though. Apple prefers to have less supply than more, right? You know, we saw there was a very good story by The Information earlier this week talking about the Snap Spectacles. There are hundreds of thousands of those things sitting in warehouses. That would be a nightmare for Apple. They'd far prefer to have too few than too many, because they expect that demand to continue into the new year and beyond. Right,
and the lines always make for good video on the day of the iPhone release.
What a scam that is, by the way.
We've talked about this every year.
You and I have been talking about this for 7 years.
But you know, how little is too little?
Well, look. What Apple has done around managing inventory has never been done in the history of technology. There's no company ever that has had a run like Apple has had of 10 years without 10 years plus without inventory problems, whether it be too much or even too little. They've had enormously successful products, but they've managed inventory better than any company in technology history. Even retailers can't get things this right. They're really, it's just a miraculous thing.
In part to Tim Cook's credit, and was the COO
because it was Tim Cook doing
the entire supply chain.
And indeed, Tim Cook probably made himself available for the CEO job, qualified himself as CEO because he had managed these things so well that Steve Jobs had screwed up so badly in years past as CEO. They're due for a screw-up here. And if they have a screw-up, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, except that they have done things so well here. I think there's another question, though, about demand for this phone and what the phone's going to be like. It is it is a more substantially different phone than any phone since the very first iPhone. And so
it's also more expensive.
It's also a lot of bread. So we'll see how much, the fanboys will be out there. People like me will be up at midnight ordering a phone. But the question is, what's the demand going to be like down the line? And what are the initial product reviews going to be like, not just from the reviewers, but from the community of iPhone users? If they don't like the facial recognition software, if they don't like the lack of a button, if the tweaks in this phone aren't well received at that extraordinary price.
And how are consensus estimates changing as a result of these reports, Alex?
We haven't seen massive changes so far. A lot of the analysis has not been amongst the sell side, the buy side analysts. But the thing which is going to be interesting is a week on Thursday where Apple has their earnings, and they will give then a forecast for the current quarter. That's the one which ends December the 31st, and how the sales are doing in that particular quarter. That will give the biggest hint, and we can expect some comments from Tim Cook and from the CFO, Luca Maestri, on whether these supply chain issues are really hitting them.
Apple shares slightly up today.
We'll say that, to Alex's point, we were just talking about it on Bloomberg Radio, that maybe the expectations weren't really great for shipments in this quarter, and that it's not a big lever in terms of the stock movement or stock expectations for this year. But what the sales are into the fourth quarter, calendar fourth quarter, are really what's going to matter the most here, and how much and what the demand is like, and if it can carry through.
I mean, I guess the thing is, when we've been looking at the ramp up towards the iPhone 10, we've been talking a lot about the super cycle. We've not been talking about how are sales going to be in the Christmas quarter. People, largely speaking, I expect, are not investing in Apple stock for what happens between November the 3rd, when the iPhone hits shelves, and December the 31st. They're investing in a 2-year product cycle. Beyond that, there might be other questions, but that's what the investment...
well, but I mean, as far as Wall Street goes, they've got to make numbers. I mean, if the company doesn't make numbers, and that also speaks to how they guide Wall Street. But
that's also interesting to see that questions about the popularity of the iPhone 8 have in fact been having a greater impact than expectations for the iPhone 10, because that speaks to the strength of the brand. Like, people buying the iPhone because it's an iPhone, not necessarily because it's better than any other product out there. So weakness in the iPhone 8 is in some ways a more interesting story than weakness in the iPhone 10.
Right, so let's talk about that a little bit. What are we seeing in terms of demand for the iPhone 10 relative to the iPhone 8? There's been concern that, you know, anticipation for the iPhone 10 would cannibalize the iPhone 8.
Yes, and it certainly seems to have done so far, but there are also, I think, consumers out there who are waiting to buy. They might still buy an iPhone 8, but they're waiting to have the two phones in their hand and say, do I want to pay, as you said, a few $100s more for Face ID and an emoji, basically?
Right.
You know, or will I pay? I'm happy to pay just, I think it's what, $650 or something for the iPhone 8, and that satisfies all my needs.
And is there any question of whether Apple will be able to meet follow-on demand? I mean, the initial rollout, the initial few weeks is one thing, but are these supply issues, going to be happening over the longer term?
It seems as though they've broken the back of them so far, and they're just getting to a point where they're getting the yields in all these components which will satisfy demand going into the new year. But on the opening weekend, you know, Apple typically sells close to 20 million phones on opening weekend. There are big question marks about that. But looking forward into January, February and beyond, things maybe look a little bit more optimistic.
And maybe investors should keep that in mind, that the orchestration of this event, where they make sure the lines are longer than the phones available and they try to make a lot of publicity out of that, does not tell us what demand is going to be 10 and 12, and to your point, 8 weeks or 10 or 12 months later.
There was a very interesting press release this morning from Apple where they said they pre-announced, the pre-orders are coming on Friday, and they did say we will have some iPhones in store, arrive early to ensure you get one. That is seemingly very orchestrated. Come to stores, then we've got photographs of people queuing for iPhones.
All right, Alex Webb, our Bloomberg tech reporter who covers Apple, Corey Johnson, our editor at large. As always, thank you so much. Pre-orders start this Friday. Well, AT&T reported earnings after the closing bell. The company fell short of forecasts for wireless subscriber growth, a disappointment after industry leader Verizon reported better than expected gains. This disappointing growth highlighting why AT&T is looking to its pending $85.4 billion purchase of Time Warner to provide new growth opportunities. Both of its main businesses, phone service and DirecTV, have stalled or are in decline. Coming up, Twitter is taking steps to ensure that Russian meddling in U.S. elections is a thing of the past. But will its latest move be enough to stop future interference? That is next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. New York, 2 p.m. San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.
%, of the S&P 500 members, MACDs, are signaling
Facebook is testing splitting its news feed in two. The test separates commercial posts from personal news feeds. The new space, dubbed Explore, was tested in 6 countries. The social media giant says the goal is to understand if people prefer to have separate places for personal and public content. Facebook also added that there is no current plan to charge pages on Facebook to pay for all their distribution in Newsfeed or Explore. Well, Twitter, Facebook, and Alphabet will not be sending their top executives to testify in front of Congress on November 1st. Instead, the 3 tech companies will send their top lawyers to answer questions on how Russia interfered in last year's U.S. presidential election using their platforms. Meantime, Twitter is rolling out a service that will show details behind who is advertising on the social network and how much they are spending. This is part of their continued response to prevent foreign actors from using Twitter to manipulate elections. Joining me now to discuss, Selena Wang, who covers Twitter for Bloomberg. So what do you make of these policy changes? How will they work?
This policy change by Twitter is by far one of the most sweeping changes any of the social networks has ever made. And for Twitter, it's definitely a big turnaround from their initial response. If you remember, the first time that they presented to Congress, Senator Mark Warner came around and said that was deeply disappointing. That was so inadequate. Twitter
they seemed
is clearly
completely unprepared. They didn't have the data they needed.
And now we just saw Mark Warner tweet that this is a great step forward. I'm so glad that Twitter is doing this. So how it's going to work in practice is that they're going to set up this transparency center that's going to be available to any consumer, any user of Twitter. They'll be able to see every ad on Twitter, all of them, how they're being targeted, how long they've been running for, and for campaigns, they'll have a specific section that will show these are the ads that are supported by these organizations. This is how much this campaign costs. This is who's supporting and backing it. So this comes leaps and bounds from the beginnings of this, where they were under so much criticism for being very untransparent about how their ads were being delivered.
So if I see a promoted tweet on Twitter, will I immediately be able to see who paid for that and how much that company has paid for such ads, or will I have to click away to a separate site?
Right, so they showed an example of what a political tweet might look like. So a political campaign ad will have a different, maybe background, different coloring. I don't know if it's going to be, we don't know yet what the exact details will look like in terms of the cost, if that's going to show up on the tweet, but I'm sure it will easily lead it to another area to click on the link.
So how does this compare to what Facebook has said they will do?
So Facebook has definitely done a lot since the very beginning. Sheryl Sandberg, Mark Zuckerberg hopping on the phone, getting on the phone with people in Congress. Now, Facebook has said they're going to hire thousands of people to vet these ads. Twitter has not said they're going to hire any people, and sources have told me that the way the company is thinking about this is that they don't necessarily think it makes sense to hire a whole bunch of new people and really reboot them and get them up to speed on this issue. So it does seem like Facebook is putting even more manpower into this, but with this policy, Twitter is making a very clear change and demarcation of where they stand on this.
How quickly will these changes be in effect?
Well, hopefully very soon. I mean, they have their testimony to Congress on November 1st, so I'm sure they'll want to show Congress that they're making real progress on this before that. But I also think it's important to mention that this only addresses a slice of Twitter's issues. Right. A big issue Congress is looking at is the bot problem, and that's totally separate from the ad situation. That doesn't cost any money for these bots to be made.
I want to ask you also about their other big problem, which is harassment, online harassment. Twitter has taken a new approach recently, saying they're going to be more transparent about their workflow, how they're approaching the problem. How has that been received, and how has that actually played out?
Right. I think the entire Rose McGowan situation was a PR nightmare for them when women boycotted the site because they temporarily disabled a woman's account who was naming and shaming people in the sexual harassment case. So far, the feedback I've heard is that this is good. It's a step in the right direction. It's great that other people can flag when something is inappropriate, that they're going to be harsher to people who are clearly harassing and targeting other people. But others say this is too little, too late, and there's also a big controversy over the way that they prioritize the abuse and flagging system, because a lot of people still think that they really prioritize celebrity accounts, verified accounts over the average user on the site.
All right, something we'll continue to follow, and I know you will keep us apprised. Twitter earnings, of course, happening later this week. Selena Wang, our Bloomberg tech reporter who covers Twitter, thank you so much. Quick disclosure, Bloomberg LP is developing a global breaking news network for Twitter. Coming up, after just 4 months on the job, Airbnb's China head is leaving. What it means for the company in such a vital region, next. This is Bloomberg. Amazon is trying to boost its product videos by mid-December to keep holiday shoppers from wandering to Google's YouTube and Facebook. This as consumers are increasingly viewing product videos before purchasing items. Amazon is testing a program to produce videos with merchant partners. products include electronics, housewares, baby and pet products as well. Well, Airbnb has long regarded building a brand in China as vital, and now the company is facing a huge obstacle. The head of the Airbnb China business has left just 4 months after taking the top job there. Hong Ge, a former software engineer at Facebook and Google, told colleagues he was leaving the company for another opportunity. His departure shows the struggle Airbnb faces in China, where protectionist laws and fierce competitors have impacted other tech giants like, of course, Uber. Joining us now with more details, Bloomberg Tech's Olivia Zaleski, who covers all things Airbnb. So what happened?
Well, we don't know exactly why he left. What we do know is that he left after only 4 months, which is pretty remarkable, especially at such a big company that people are really excited about. You know, I think this really speaks to the larger issues that Airbnb is having in China. They announced in 2015 that they were planning to break off a separate corporation called Abaying, which is Airbnb China, and that they would have a separate CEO for that corporation. And they spent almost 2 years searching for a CEO of that division. They couldn't find anyone, so they hired someone internally, Hong Ge, and he left after 4 months.
Interestingly, Airbnb just a few days ago announced that Nate Blanchardzik, co-founder of Airbnb, was going to become chairman of China, but didn't say anything about this. We actually spoke to Nate in Asia recently. Take a listen to what he had to say about the potential of the China market for Airbnb.
We've been investing a lot into China, though, lately. Chinese travelers are going all around the world. It's the fastest growing segment. They're the #1 spenders on international travel. We're running a big campaign there right now. And so a lot of our growth in Singapore and elsewhere is happening as a result of Chinese travelers using Airbnb to explore the world.
You wonder if they are running into the same challenges of building a business in China that every other U.S. technology company has run into, including Uber, Facebook, and Google, and Twitter are blocked in China. And maybe those challenges have been as yet insurmountable.
They are astronomical challenges, certainly. I mean, you're dealing with government regulations that are often feel extreme to a U.S. company, all sorts of competitive moves from these copycat companies that really have a strong ground game in China, and also hiring. It's very, very difficult. I think one of the biggest challenges that Airbnb faces is hiring somebody that has that entrepreneurial, scrappy sense, but is also really comfortable with playing by the rules and following government regulation.
So do we have any idea who might replace him, or if they intend to replace him?
I think they do intend to replace him, but it could be another 2 years. I mean, at the rate that they're going. So Nate is a great option for now, and you know, I think this is a situation that we're going to need to watch really, really closely and more to come.
What actual progress has Airbnb made in China?
They've certainly grown their number of listings. So last year they had about 80,000 listings in China, and now they have about 120. But they still face a lot of problems with fraud. And if you compare them to their local competitors like Tujia, Tujia has 600,000 listings. So you know, you're looking at a situation that's very similar to Uber, Didi, where you have this homegrown competitor that is just so embedded in the society there and has really built a name for itself. It's very difficult to get people to change their brand loyalty.
Do we have a statement from Airbnb on this yet?
They gave a no comment on Hong Ge's departure.
All right. Olivia Zaleski, our Bloomberg Tech reporter who covers Airbnb, thank you so much for joining us. All right, there are a few other startups making headlines today. Uber says it's starting new ways for drivers to be compensated. Starting in October, Uber drivers will be able to earn standard time and distance rates on longer trips, as well as a fee on top of the standard trip fare on certain levels of services. Uber is also adjusting rates for late cancellations, and drivers will earn more per minute if they have to wait longer than 2 minutes for a passenger. Lord & Taylor's iconic flagship store has been sold. Meantime, parent Hudson Bay has sold the Fifth Avenue building to a WeWork joint venture for $850 million. The move will help Hudson offload debt. WeWork will establish global headquarters at the location. WeWork has been outgrowing its current New York headquarters. The company currently operates in 56 cities around the world. Coming up, allegations of gender discrimination in Silicon Valley are anything but new, but one lawsuit could be a game changer if the plaintiff gets permission to represent over 125 female engineers. And if you think Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. It's time for a check of First Word News. Arizona Republican Senator Jeff Flake says he won't seek re-election. Flake was highly critical of President Trump and said we must stop pretending, quote, the conduct of some in our executive branch is normal.
When a leader correctly identifies real hurt and insecurity in our country and instead of addressing it goes to look for someone to blame, there is perhaps nothing more devastating to a pluralistic society.
Senator Flake accused the president of undermining American democracy with his, quote, flagrant disregard of truth and decency. Flake said, again quoting, there are times we must risk our careers. Now is such a time. The president and Republican Senator Bob Corker are at it again, this time over taxes. Corker's calling on the president to stay out of the tax overhaul effort. The president tweeted Corker couldn't get elected dog catcher in his home state of Tennessee. Corker responded, quote, untruths from an utterly untruthful president. The U.S. is moving toward officially condemning the violence on Myanmar's Rohingya Muslims as, quote, ethnic cleansing. The Associated Press reports Secretary of State Rex Tillerson could receive the recommendation to adopt such terminology as a matter of policy as early as this week. French President Emmanuel Macron and Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar say they're ready to discuss the contentious issue of taxing internet giants. President Macron's leading the tax charge in Europe, saying it's not fair that internet companies don't pay taxes where they make most of their money. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in New York, 8:30 Wednesday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. New Zealand, of course, already trading this Wednesday morning, currently off a little more than 1/10%, and that's despite a very positive lead we saw from U.S. equities. Over in Japan, Nikkei futures are pointing reasonably strongly higher, up about 1/10%, while here in Australia, futures indicate currently up 1/4%, so we could have a bright start in store when trading gets underway here in Sydney. Keep an eye on the Aussie dollar today, currently trading around 77 cents. Might move when we get the release of third quarter CPI data. That is estimated to expand 1/8% in the quarter, giving us an annualized figure of 2% year on year. The big event today, though, the unveiling of the Politburo Standing Committee in China. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. The recent groundswell of women speaking out and alleging gender discrimination at tech and venture capital firms is shedding light on the rocky terrain women face culturally and professionally in Silicon Valley. Google, Microsoft, Oracle, Uber, and Twitter are all facing similar lawsuits on this matter. Tina Huang, a former engineer at Twitter, filed a suit 2 years ago alleging the company systematically thwarts the advancement of female engineers. Since then, she's been gathering data on gender and pay for her peers and believes she can prove that Twitter stacked the deck. And by early next year, she plans to ask a state judge for permission to represent 133 female engineers at Twitter. This would be the first group case of its kind in Silicon Valley if it's certified. Twitter has rejected these claims in court filings. Joining me now to discuss our Bloomberg News legal reporter Joel Rosenblatt, who covers this case and other cases in California, and Jason Lohr, an employment attorney who represents Tina Huang. So Jason, first of all, a lot of these cases get dropped, they get settled, attorneys don't take them. What makes this case different?
Well, I think what makes this case different is the plaintiff, is Ms. Huang herself. She feels very strongly that she was denied a promotion due to her gender. She feels that her contemporaries at Twitter, other female engineers, have also been denied advancement, and she's really willing to take this case to trial.
But how do we know she was denied these things based on her gender and not her performance?
Well, so in this case, so this is a class action case, and many of these cases, discrimination cases, are individual cases. In this case, she's seeking to represent all of the women engineers at Twitter. And the case is based on a theory called disparate impact. And what that means is basically the promotion process, while maybe it wasn't devised to discriminate against women, the impact of the process adversely affects women. And to put it simply, what we're saying is that it took women longer to get promotions, and fewer women had promotions than we might expect.
Ellen Pao felt passionately about her case too. Joel, what do you think makes this case different?
Well, so Ellen Pao's case was really about Ellen Pao. There was discrimination claims in her suit, but there was a lot of harassment. It was more focused on the harassment, and it was focused on Ellen Pao. This is, as Jason was explaining, is about a systematic bias at Twitter against women. So it differs a lot from Ellen Pao's case in that way in particular.
Twitter did give you a statement saying Twitter is deeply committed to a diverse and supportive workplace, and we believe the facts will show Ms. Huang was treated fairly. Joel, what do you think is the likelihood this actually gets certified as a class action suit? There is no precedent for this.
There's no precedent that I'm aware of. I think what this is going to turn on is the data that Tina is able to turn up, extract from Twitter, and marshal in her favor. And if she's able to extract numbers and data that support her case, I mean, it seems like there's a good chance. I think it all depends on that. I've seen some of those numbers, and they initially filed in the lawsuit. They've changed. There's a dispute between Tina and Twitter about those numbers that's going to be resolved or taken up in court this week on Thursday.
So, Jason, what can you tell us about these numbers and what they show?
Well, of course, I'm hesitant to talk about getting into the nitty-gritty of the evidence of this case. But what I can tell you is the data is going to be really important for us. What we're going to basically have to show is that fewer women were promoted than statistically we would think should happen. That's to say that more men are being promoted than women. And we're still working with Twitter to get that data. There's some bumps in the roads, but I'm confident that that's what the data will show.
Now, I recently interviewed Megan Smith, who worked at Google for a very long time. She was CTO of the United States of America for a couple of years, and she had this to say about the broader discrimination that faces women in technology. Take a listen.
It's insidious and it's all around the culture, and then when you're getting it, it's so personal, it's hard, and it's agile. It's hard to understand it as a pattern, but it's almost class action if you can see the pattern.
So she says it's almost class action, sort of, speaking to this idea that women in tech might have, a broader, case here. Joel, if this case gets certified, what kind of a precedent could that set?
I think it's a big precedent, it's a very important case for that reason. What makes it special is this, along with a case against Microsoft, is very far along. So we're at class certification. That's a big hurdle. If they get that and then they get to a decision, it would be enormously influential for other judges looking at similar cases going forward.
And how do you think the climate right now? I mean, we've seen many sexual harassment allegations, especially in the last year. We've seen men get fired. We've seen the CEO of Uber resign. Some people have said if Ellen Pao filed her suit today, maybe she would have won. Do you think the environment matters, or will have an impact here?
I think the environment matters in terms of decisions, right? I think it matters for judges what cases came before. I don't think that the climate matters for judges. Juries, maybe Jason's probably the better person to ask about that, but I think the way the climate really shapes these kind of suits are in terms of encouraging and motivating other women to come forward. So I think you begin to see more of these cases, but how the outcomes kind of depend on precedent and the legal issues, I think.
Jason, have you been talking to other engineers at Twitter, female engineers at Twitter, and what do they say?
Well, so I think that the folks we've spoken with say that clearly there's a problem. And, you know, if you look at the statistics from when we filed the case in 2015, if you looked across Twitter, 35% of the employees were women. If you looked at just the technical positions, engineers, less than 10% of those folks were women. And everyone we've spoken to seems to agree that that is impacting the work environment. Just the fact that the population there is skewed so heavily towards males.
So next steps, when will we know for sure?
So the next step in our case is class certification, which we're hoping that the class will be certified, or at least we'll have a decision as early as March of next year. Once that's done, and assuming that we're able to proceed as a class action, then we need to get a little more data to see if we can really prove up what we're saying is happening over there.
All right, Jason Lohr, employment attorney representing Tina Huang, Joel Rosenblatt, our legal reporter. Thank you both. We'll keep following the story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick disclosure, Bloomberg LP, as I said earlier, is developing a global breaking news network for Twitter. Coming up, we will hear from the billionaire investor who threw the Weinstein Company a lifeline, why Tom Barrack made the investment in the studio, and how does he envision the studio going forward. This is Bloomberg. Billionaire Tom Barrack, who threw embattled film studio Weinstein Company a financial lifeline last week, likened the studio to a critically injured patient, adding that it can be revived. He sat down with Bloomberg TV at the Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Take a listen.
I don't know that we've come to the rescue, but the company itself, if you recall, we purchased Miramax.
I do recall.
From Disney, which
in
was
2010.
Yes. Which was a previous company that the Weinsteins had sponsored. And with 750 films, 750 projects in the can, it was a great acquisition from Disney. So we were familiar with the portfolio, the library, and the process.
Why do you say you haven't bailed them out or rescued them yet?
Well, and when we say rescue, there's a big difference between the Weinsteins and the company. So Harvey, whatever the accusations are, his conduct was totally unacceptable, reprehensible, and unacceptable on any term. So no one is interested in salvaging a company which would benefit Harvey. However, you have 115 individuals, you have a TV production company, you have an independent film company, you have a distribution company, and which has counterparts that are relying on stability. So in a very short period of time, if the Weinstein element could be removed, if the toxicity of the liabilities that are around it could be addressed, and if the content of the company could continue on in a normal way, there's some value. Whether that can happen or not is a question.
When you say the Weinstein element removed, do you mean Bob as well as Harvey?
Well, Bob, of course, is in a satellite position to this, fortunately or unfortunately. And the benefit of his name is also the detriment of his name. But Bob has been very capable at his own business, which is Dimension. So ring fencing the Weinsteins in whatever manner needs to be done without being punitive to Bob, who at this point in time has no culpability apparently in the process. Nevertheless, the counterparts are going to want the Weinsteins gone, and how that gets done is an issue and a question.
Can you tell at this point whether you're going to buy it or not?
No.
When will you know?
Soon.
Soon. Any idea what it will cost?
You know, we're under a non-disclosure agreement, and of course you have hundreds of creative people whose lives are in the offing here. I wouldn't venture to.
Well, let's try to put scale it, if you will. Miramax was a $660 million deal.
Yes.
A very big film library with some famous titles. Is this as valuable an asset as that was?
Well, it's hard to say because you have to take liabilities. So you have stated liabilities on the balance sheet that go against mostly the previous library. Then you have attendant liabilities that arise from the acts of Harvey now. Which of those liabilities are attributable to the company on an ongoing basis and which aren't is a Rubik's Cube. Very difficult, very, very difficult. So the first objective is you have a patient that's dying on the table. You need to revive them and get them to breathe first. If you can do that, then maybe you can see, can they walk? And if they can walk, perhaps you can get them in a race. It's a real issue.
Tom Barrack there, Executive Chairman of Colony NorthStar, with Bloomberg's Eric Schatzker in Riyadh. Coming up, Representative Eric Swalwell of the House Intelligence Committee gives us the latest news on the investigation into Russian meddling in U.S. elections. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Now back to the continued investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. elections. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill held their first hearings into the Honest Ads Act today. The bipartisan legislation would require online advertisements to disclose the same information about their funders as radio and TV ads. Joining me now from the Capitol, Representative Eric Swalwell, who represents California's 15th District and is a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Representative Swalwell, thank you so much for joining us. So what is your take on the Honest Ads Act? Does this act have what it takes?
I think more information is always better, particularly knowing that foreign adversaries will seek to use and weaponize our social media platforms to undermine our democracy. I don't want to do anything to stop, my mom or, any of my constituents from posting their political beliefs. But once people start to, post political beliefs in a coordinated way that is, in an effort to try and undermine a democracy, then I think transparency at the very least should be expected, and so that's what these pieces of legislation seek to do.
And what should the company's responsibilities be, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Google? Should they have to keep track of every single ad, or should that be somebody else's job?
Again, what's so great about these platforms is, we're all free to post what we believe. I don't want to limit that at all. But if it's in a more, coordinated way with, a high volume of users who are supposed to be reached, then I do think there's a responsibility to understand who's posting and whether your platforms are being used by America's adversaries. And so, we'll have to come up with, what dollar amount in ad spending that is, or what, number of other users targeted that would be. But we now know that other countries, would seek to undermine our democracy with social media. And so going forward, we should try and prevent that.
Now, Trump's former digital director, Brad Pascal, as we understand, testified today before the committee. What can you tell us about that and his ongoing role in this investigation going forward?
Yeah, Emily, we don't usually go into, who the witnesses are, other than to say that, this was a digital crime that occurred. There was a hacking of Democratic committee emails, John Podesta's emails, the perpetuation of fake news through social media and Twitter. And so that was what Russia did. We want to understand whether they worked with anyone on the Trump campaign. And so, we're seeking to interview anyone who worked on the Trump data operation to understand whether there was a partnership with Russia, and so that we hopefully can report to the American people soon. And we also have an open hearing coming up where the public will be able to hear from social media companies what they found in the last campaign.
Right, we will be covering that on November 1st. Congressman Will Hurd spoke about the progress on the Russia investigation earlier. Take a listen to what he had to say.
It is Congress, and so you're going to have some partisan bickering at times. But I do believe that this investigation is proceeding in a thorough way, and that both sides is being done in a bipartisan way. And we should get to the bottom as quickly as we can. I've always said the Russians are not going to stop.
Congressman Swalwell, I'm wondering how you would characterize progress on the investigation. You've mentioned that to keep the investigation credible, Paul Ryan needs to intervene to keep Devin Nunes's fingerprints off it. How badly has Nunes hampered this investigation?
Well, the best shield against a future attack is unity among our nation's lawmakers, and the best way to sharpen Russian swords would be disunity. And so the Russians scored a major victory today when Devin Nunes and Trey Gowdy and others announced that they're going to go back in time and look at, wild allegations about Hillary Clinton. I think that just, allows the Russians, to continue to do the work that they do to try and undermine our democracy and, use that chaos as a weapon. And I really wish we would just agree that we were attacked and we have a responsibility to identify how we were vulnerable and whether any U.S. persons worked with them. Again, disunity will only make the next election worse.
To the extent that you can share, what new evidence have you uncovered?
Oh, well, we hope to have a report very soon. I expect the November 1st open hearing, we will be able to report some of the digital evidence we found as far as social media. But, my goal, Emily, is that it will be a declassified report to the extent possible that, it will tell the American people, who was what Russia was doing, who they were working with, but also make recommendations about what we can do going forward. But we have seen a deep willingness and eagerness on the Trump campaign to work with the Russians, whether it was Roger Stone or Carter Page going over there, or Michael Cohen and Felix Sater's email where Felix Sater tells Michael Cohen, I can work with Putin and we can engineer this for our boys. So there was an eagerness. Now we just have to see if that materialized to a partnership.
You've complained about the lack of interest of some of your GOP colleagues in this investigation. I'm curious whether you have any concerns about the public in general losing interest in this investigation or the investigation itself losing steam.
No, I think the public knows and values our freedom to choose. That's what this is really about, is who gets to choose at the ballot box. Is it us or is it one of our enemies? And so I think, every American, Republican or Democrat, takes that seriously.
All right, Representative Eric Swalwell, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here today on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Finally, in today's revolving door, Hulu CEO Mike Hopkins is leaving the company to take the job as chair of Sony Pictures Television. The streaming site has named 21st Century Fox Chief Operating Officer Randy Freer as his replacement to lead building the company's live and on-demand TV businesses as more consumers ditch cable for web-based alternatives. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder, we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.